Greetings everyone. I want to play you a clip that I found rather unusual. It's from the Joe Rogan podcast, and he has a guy on there whose name is Sebastian Junger. According to Wikipedia, he is a journalist and a filmmaker. And here he is on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about a near-death experience that he had. First of all, he goes into how he even got into that situation, what was going on with his body. And then when he actually starts explaining what happened, it sounds like a very negative one. I don't know if you've ever read or listened to people's near-death experiences. They're very interesting. I've personally read and listened to quite a lot of them. Some of them are very positive. The things they describe are really wonderful, and others have less positive ones. And sometimes you wonder if that is a reflection of their life and how they have lived it. Perhaps a reflection of the state of their soul. That if they have a very positive one, then perhaps they're going down the right path. They're living their life well, as they should, not doing too many things wrong. Whereas if it's a very negative one, maybe it's like a warning to say, hey, you know what, you need to change your life because this is kind of how your soul looks right now. This is where you're heading. And his one was rather negative. So here he is talking about how he almost died and what he saw while he was dying.
I just felt this pain shoot through my stomach. I was like, damn, what is that? And within a few minutes, I couldn't stand up. And within about 10 minutes, I was starting to go blind. And my wife called the ambulance, and those guys got there, and I was tanking really fast. And the hospital is an hour away. And by a miracle, I don't even think the doctors understand it, but by a miracle, I was still alive when I got to the hospital. I lost 90% of my blood into my abdomen.
So you notice that he uses the word miracle. So when he used that word, I'm already thinking, this guy, even if he didn't believe anything before, anything supernatural, he believes now because he believes this was a miracle.
I didn't know I was dying, but I was dying, and I was right in that sort of twilight zone. And a black pit opened up underneath me, and I felt myself starting to get pulled down into it, and I didn't want to go. Like, it was cold and dark and black and bottomless, and I just knew, like, do not go down there. I was getting pulled down into it, and right at that moment, my father, who passed away in 2012, my father sort of appeared next to me and started trying to communicate with me and comforting me, and I sort of waved him away, and the last thing I remember saying to the doctor, I was sort of losing consciousness, and the last thing I said to the doctor was, "You're losing me right now. You got to hurry." He was trying to he'd cut my neck open. He was trying to put a line into my neck to, they pumped 10 units of blood into me, and that's what brought me back.
When you say you felt you were sinking into a pit, like, were you seeing this?
I mean, your perceptions are very weird because very little oxygen in the brain. I had a hemoglobin count of 1.2. If you're a doctor, you know what that is. It's almost unheard of. And so I just felt this pit underneath me, and it was pulling me into it, and I didn't want to go.
And you can see a pit?
Again, see/feel. Your perceptions are very weird when you're like that.
So coming out of that, once you regained your health, you must have had an incredible newfound appreciation for all the people in your life and just everything.
The next morning, I didn't know that I'd almost died. I had no idea. I have two little girls. I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and they're the most precious things to me. I can't even describe it, obviously. And the fact that they almost lost their dad was just devastating when the ICU nurse came in and said, "How are you doing, Mr. Junger? You're one lucky guy. You almost died yesterday." I had no idea. It's really terrifying. I didn't know. And I said, "I almost died in my own driveway in front of my family, and I didn't even know." And she said, one of the wisest things I've ever heard. She said, "Stop thinking of that moment as scary and start thinking of it as sacred." And she didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. And the next 5 days in the ICU, I thought about the word sacred and what the experience was now giving me access to. And, not to sound sort of like trite, but life is a friggin' miracle. And, I'm not religious, whatever. I certainly didn't quite understand what a miracle it is that we're alive, that we exist, that we draw breath, that we can think about ourselves, that we're here for even one day is a freaking miracle. I feel like life was sort of returned to me, meaning that I understood how sacred it is.
So he repeats the word miracle And then he even uses the word sacred, or he says the nurse in the room told him to look at it as a sacred experience, and that he actually realized, yes, life is sacred.
And again, I'm an atheist. I don't mean sacred in a religious sense. I mean in the sense that it has a profound value, and you mustn't forget.
This is the strangest part for me. So he explains this whole experience, that he's kind of being lowered into this dark pit, that he sees his father at some point trying to help him or trying to comfort him, and then realizes after this that he's very grateful for life, that it's a miracle that he's alive, that he's realized that life is sacred, and yet then he says, well, I'm still an atheist. I don't mean sacred in the religious sense. Talk about being hit by a divine 2x4 and not realizing you've been hit by a divine 2x4. This, to me, is almost on par with Jesus literally appearing to somebody saying, I am Jesus, the Son of God. I'm real, and you need to change your life, and you need to change it fast. And then afterwards you go, yeah, I'm still an atheist. I had this weird experience where Jesus showed up, but maybe that was some kind of illusion. I don't know what that was. How many people can say that they've had this kind of experience? I know a lot of people have had it, but it's still a very, very tiny amount of people that have this kind of supernatural experience of almost like a glimpse of the other side. And as I said before, a lot of people that have had a near-death experience, if they weren't believers, they became believers. This basically showed them that it's all true, that there is a God, that there is an afterlife, and it just completely changed their lives for the better. Obviously, it didn't mean they were perfect afterwards, because we're still sinners, we still need God, we still need to pray for him to help us, but it gave them a completely different perspective on life. Now, the strange thing is this guy here, Sebastian Junger, did have a different perspective on life. He was much more appreciative of life.
All I have to do is go back to that moment of what happened in that driveway, and that I was spared getting pulled into that pit. That didn't happen. And my daughters get to have a father. I get to experience whatever the rest of my life is, whatever it is. Who knows how long I'll live, but I that gift was returned to me. And I don't even know who to say thank you to.
But he completely missed the fact that there's a God. And even the fact that he survived something he basically didn't really have any chance of surviving should prompt him to think maybe a higher power got involved. Maybe a greater being saved him. A being who loves him. A being who showed him that he's heading down the wrong path, but he's going to get another chance because he could have died there and then. Of course, I don't know what would have happened to him if he had died. I don't know what God's judgment would have been. But the fact that he experienced this really negative thing where he was heading downwards into a dark pit would suggest that if he had died in that moment, it's very possible that he would have been going straight to hell. And yet here he's been given another chance. He's been kept alive when really there shouldn't have been any possibility of him surviving this. And he now has this chance to do things completely differently, because I don't know anything about his life. But again, if it was such a negative experience that he had when he was dying, there's a good possibility that he was doing something wrong or some things wrong to have such a bad experience, such a negative experience of what looked like, let's be honest, like he was heading to hell, because he was heading downwards into a dark pit. And if he hasn't seen this as an opportunity from God, as a second chance from God to, first of all, acknowledge that God exists, and then secondly, live his life very differently, perhaps start praying, something he wouldn't have done before if he was an atheist, and just see life completely differently in the sense of what is important and what isn't. And again, he seems to have sort of done that, because he's realized the importance of, I mean, he already knew the importance of his children, but he's sort of even more grateful that he has them and even more grateful that he's alive. But he's just totally missed the point of this. The main point of having such an experience was to say, hey, there's a God. Life isn't pointless. Life isn't random. You've been given a second chance. Use it well. So that part where he continues on and says, well, it's a miracle and it's sacred, but, you know, he still doesn't believe in God, basically. I just find that so odd. It's such an odd thing for a person to do, to say. It's a little bit like that passage from Scripture, and it's not the best example for this situation, but you know that passage that talks about how if scripture and if the prophets are not enough for people to believe, then even if someone should come back from the dead and tell people that there's a God, that there's an afterlife, that there's a heaven, that there's a hell, people still won't believe. This isn't quite like that, because it would fit more if he had actually had this near-death experience, realized there's a God, there's a hell, and then come back and talked about it, and then other people listened to him and said, actually, no, I don't believe any of that. You probably just had some kind of hallucination. Your brain was probably projecting weird images for some reason, etc., etc. Then that would apply more perfectly here, because you could say, yes, this person came back. They were dead for a few minutes. They came back to tell the story, and people still don't believe them. Whereas this is even weirder, because he was dead for a little while. He saw the other side, and then he didn't believe what he saw himself. So it's a very odd situation. And I really feel like he's missed the boat here. I hope that at some point in future he realizes what this was, or he explores it much further. But what do you think about this, folks? Are you surprised by this guy's conclusion that he's seen all this, he's had this incredible experience, he's throwing words around like this is a miracle, this is sacred, and yet he still says actually he's an atheist, but he just appreciates life a bit more? Let me know what you think in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching the video, and have a blessed day.